Joining us now is retired Marine Corps officer Lieutenant Colonel Dakota Wood. He's a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Colonel Wood, thanks very much for coming in to join us. Those American and British forces now who are in the region, how vulnerable are they, do you think, because of this attack?
Well, I don't know that they're any more vulnerable than they were, several days ago. I mean, they're in a forced posture where they always have to be aware of threats local, whether it's in Iraq or Syria.
Except that they've actually pulled back from trying to battle ISIS in the north of Iraq into force protection.
Right, so
I mean, what they have to do now is protect
So any time after an incident occurs, you have a heightened alert status. My wife and I were visiting a U.S. military base just a couple of days ago, and even here in the state of Virginia, next to Washington, D.C., they were on a heightened alert and checking ID cards. So these things are natural occurrences. But you're talking military forces that are in a troubled region, fully aware of the risks that go along with that, and so they have a heightened force posture and have to be more aware of their surroundings. Absolutely.
So I'm sure you've been watching the scenes from Iran. It's not unusual to have big crowds shouting death to America, of course, from that region. But to some extent, the Iranian regime had been under pressure. We've been reporting on this program in November and December about the protests in the country because of the sanctions and the economic squeeze that Iranians are under. Are you concerned that this attack against Soleimani has actually unified Iranians and Iranian nationalism against the United States at a time perhaps when the regime was a little bit more vulnerable?
No, not at all. Because, the people who were protesting against the regime were protesting in part the regime's behavior outside of Iran. This fomenting of terror groups, supporting organizations like Hezbollah, it's written
but they're not protesting against the regime today.
The point is the people are tired of a theocratic, autocratic governing structure that prevents tourism, prevents meaningful trade and commerce with the global community, restricts access, just the whole individual freedoms that we so prize in the West. So it's that kind of thing. So taking out a major terrorist actor like Soleimani, again, as your own program has reported out, was praised by some people to include in Iran. So I don't think that this somehow unifies the Iranian people against the United States. That actually creates windows of opportunity that this regime in Tehran is not impervious, to harm, that its actions are held to account at some level. And I think it actually probably gives some hope and opportunity for thinking differently than what was possible a week ago.
Colonel, you were involved in the operational and the logistical planning of the invasion in 2003. I'm just interested, if the Iraqis follow through on the threat to expel the American troops, if you were to take those 6,000 or so troops out of Iraq, how does that affect US operations across that region, and particularly those US troops that are in Syria?
Well, primarily, it's a reduction of intelligence. So, you're on the ground, you're talking with the locals, you're working with Iraqi forces. Some Iraqi forces are completely incompetent. Very competent and very courageous. Remember when Islamic State was rising in Syria, how the Iraqi military melted away and it had to be kind of, bucked up and put U.S. advisors on the ground. So you do lose some on-the-ground touch points to understand what's going on. And where you did have these lifelines, support infrastructure going from Iraq into Syria providing that support, the United States would find other ways to do that, working with a partner, say perhaps in Jordan or in Saudi Arabia.
So with that in mind, just very quickly, if you were looking at a long-term strategy or trying to detect what the long-term strategy is, that's problematic because one of the biggest threats to the West is the so-called Islamic State group in that area.
And if you hadn't acted at all, how would conditions have changed? You'd still have Iran trying to extend its reach through Iraq and into Syria, helping out various terror groups in that region of the world. So economic sanctions were having an impact. That's why Iran has been so restive and pushing back and attacking tankers in the Gulf and attacking Saudi Arabian oil infrastructure. And so this is another step where you're taking out a major contributor to this kind of instability in Soleimani. And it's not surprising then that Iran is going to be full of rhetoric and talking about blood in the streets and these sorts of things. So I think it's a continuation of 4 decades, 40 years of Iranian behavior, and finally we have a U.S. administration that's willing to take this kind of action directly against the regime.
Colonel Dakota Wood, very grateful for your time. Thank you.